You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
In an election year, many politicians are often focused on the short term, winning re-election to get back to this building, but oftentimes that might cloud their judgment from some of the longer term issues that plague our state or any government. Joining us now is House Democrat Mark Walker from Arlington Heights. I think it's your maiden voyage on Capital Connection, your first appearance here.
Yes,
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We were having a discussion earlier this week, and I thought it was a fascinating one, so I asked you to come on and talk about this. How do you get politicians to look past this next election and focus on those problems that might become big emergencies 5, 10, 15 years from now?
Well, it's clearly a problem because the public tends to want to know what you're doing now. But the pension system in Illinois has been a problem since, I think, 1921, an ongoing problem. And the fix of the pension system, which has started and is maybe halfway done, will take roughly 20 years. So if we're going to fix the pension system, we have to have a plan that is balanced, that is fair to everyone, that fixes it over a 20-year time frame. And it's almost impossible to talk to voters about that. There are a lot of issues like that. If you want to fix cultures, for instance, like the police culture, which is the fundamental problem, it is not the rules. It is the culture. That's a multi-decade task that takes little steps.
That's hard. That's a hard sell, isn't it? Because people at home see big immediate problems and they want big immediate action.
Right.
How do you sell that to people at home who think, wait, slow incremental change and progress, that doesn't do anything for me now?
Right. It doesn't help. So what you do is you do immediate changes that actually relieve some pain. But you have to understand, for the long term, especially in a place like Illinois that has long-term problems that have to be fixed, the solutions sometimes are long-term. And so we have to have a mix of people in Springfield, I believe, some that focus on the short term and some that actually kind of in the background focus on the long term.
John Dickerson at CBS News wrote a book, The Hardest Job in the World, about the American presidency. And I may have the president wrong here, but I believe he quoted or used a chart from President Eisenhower, who had short-term urgent problems, long-term less urgent problems, and he had this quadrant. And he would always, the executive branch was focused on identifying priorities and which things are those long-term problems that don't require action today and which ones do.
Right.
Legislators, I think, have a different task. They have that ability to take that long look if they choose to.
Right. I think everyone does. The issue is there payback in the political world?
Every 2 years.
Yeah, every 2 years we run, and every 2 years we have to have something to run on. And so only doing 20 or 10-year plans, step by step, doesn't usually help in that. You have a mix.
What effect do you think it would have if lawmakers were term limited and would not have that recurring need to get reelected? Because I guess there's two schools of thought. Some people say, I want my legislators to be envious of my vote. I want them to try and be responsive to my needs. I don't want them to be arbitrarily capped off from the relationship with me, the voter. Other people think, I don't want these career politicians, you've heard that term, who just try to snake their way through the state house and survive long enough to keep that pension check growing, right? So what effect do you think the term limits might have on that short-term problem?
I'm a fan of elections. I actually am a fan of the 2-year time frame for elections. I am not a fan of long-term legislators that go beyond, say, a 10 or 12-year period but frankly, it takes about 3 years to really get to know how to do things in this complex system we have. And so it's like having 2 terms, 4 years is just not long enough, because in the first 2 years, in the first 3 years, it's the staff and the lobbyists that determine priorities for an individual who's new here. So you don't want it too short. On the other hand, you really do stop learning for the most part on how to get things done and how to be effective after about a 10-year time frame. So
that sweet spot is between the halfway through the second term and that's where you start hitting your sophomore stride, so to speak.
Right. And different people are different, and some people learn for 30 years and drive for 30 years. But if you had to make a choice, I think that's a reasonable time frame.
That's interesting. One of the long-term issues is how do we build out our energy independence as a state, as a country? Right now, a lot of voters are feeling the pain at the pump because of the chokes in the gas supply system with what's going on in Russia and some of the supply chain issues and the demand that dropped off during COVID. There's this whole big cluster of issues that have complicated the supply and demand equation or ratios in the gas markets. That's a little bit separate, I suppose, from the actual energy issue, which lawmakers tackled this last fall. You've looked at ways to build out our base load capacity.
Right.
But what are your proposals?
Well, for the long term, taking that perspective, I am a great fan of saving the planet. And I believe that we have to control or eliminate, for the most part, carbon dioxide emissions to save the planet. I really do believe the science has shown us that.
Speaking of long-term problems.
Right, and it's a long-term problem. The problem we have, and I'm a great fan of the bill called CEJA that set these goals for 2045.
Clean Energy Jobs Act.
Yeah, Clean Energy Jobs Act. The problem I'm having is that I'm not sure we have the technology to maintain a baseline of energy that we need for our industry and homes when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And the battery technology that people are looking at for Elon Musk or someone to invent, I'm not going to bank on that. So I believe we need a base. And my base that is not carbon based is a new generation of nuclear.
What does new generation of nuclear look like? Because when we look at the big, expensive nuclear power plants that we've known for the last 50 years, they're clunky, they cost a ton of money to build. Nobody's building new ones, they're taking them offline.
Right.
So what does the next generation of nuclear look like?
Well, there are people working at the University of Illinois and in Aurora. There are people across the state that are actually working on a new nuclear that is smaller, that is distributed, meaning a big data center, a big factory could have their own little nuclear power source.
Kind of like they might have a solar panel on the roof. They might have a microreactor that creates nuclear.
Exactly right.
What do they do with their waste?
Well, that's the key issue. We have to deal with the waste. The problem with the moratorium, there's a moratorium in the law now that we're not allowed to have new nuclear. I think that's...
There's a cap, meaning we can't build new nuclear, even these little microreactors?
Can't do any of it.
Then how are they doing it?
They're not doing it in Illinois yet.
They're just studying it?
They're studying it.
With the hope that they can do it, but you'd have to lift the moratorium.
And I think we have to lift the moratorium because in this environment, which is so complex, and we need a base energy source, we can't just close our eyes and say no. We have to be able to consider things.
Well, you know that there are some lawmakers in this building who are a little bit reticent to touch anything nuclear right now. They might consider it radioactive of a different kind.
Yes.
Because of all the scrutiny applied around ComEd and Exelon and that corruption scandal. How do you navigate that thorny issue?
Well, I have nothing to do with it. You know, the thorny issue is that people have been afraid to deal with energy issues to begin with, and especially Exelon and its successor politically because of scandal. But in fact, this isn't about that at all. Well, this isn't about big nuclear plants, big companies. It's about considering new options.
If anything, could or would these smaller data centers, for example, be less reliant on an Exelon or ComEd if they had their own
absolutely
power capabilities?
I have no solution. What I'm looking for is alternatives so that we can take them seriously. I'm looking to open the discussion.
What kind of a reception are you getting?
Mixed. Some people are seriously frightened of nuclear and have been since 3 Mile Island or Fukushima. Others are seriously concerned about corruption, and that, to me, that's like a distraction. And other people are interested in the science of it.
Because you don't see any corruptibility in this specific issue of the microreactors that could help?
No. Well, there's corruptibility in anything, of course, but it's not related to the corruption that we've already seen an indictment about.
And that speaker is gone, and there's
Yeah, he's gone.
It's interesting to look at. Some of the other long-term issues, I suppose, do you hope to take any action on this session?
I am, actually, next week we're having our first subject matter hearing on it. And and people are excited on both sides about it. So I look forward to seeing if we're going to be able to come to some sort of resolution this year.
Do you expect any opposition from coal or natural gas?
Yeah, I expect opposition all over the place and support all over the place. We'll just see. We'll just see.
Very interesting. There's also been a lot of talk this year, and in the last 2 years really, since the spike in crime occurred, about the law, about justice, about safety.
Right.
Are Democrats sensitive or responsive to this issue?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think so. I think I am. Most people I talk to are. The interesting thing about this whole political world is people will throw things out of sequence automatically. Almost all of the increase in crime that people are reporting, some of which is perfectly legitimate and some not, occurred before the new law came in effect. The bulk of the new law isn't even in effect now.
Right.
And the crime occurred, and they're blaming the crime on the new law.
And that's sort of that is correct. There is some rhetoric that gets the timeline out of whack. If we set that aside for a second, though, my question is really more focused on this session, this election year session.
Right.
What parts of the law can be improved, tightened, to make Illinois a safer state?
I think we have to fully understand what funding police means. There are all kinds of things that we're working on now, for instance, to provide social services via police departments, to provide alternative policing mechanisms, to change the way police are trained, that I think is going to improve policing. The interesting thing is, when I talk to my chiefs, for the most part, the things that we talk about from the Safety Act, they said, oh, that's what I wanted to do. And we all have been caught up in political rhetoric. When I say, this is the benefit of having cameras, they say, they've come around even after a year now saying, that was right. We're actually better off now with that camera law. So I don't think we're that far apart. I think we're trying to solve crime for the long term. We're not trying to react now. Politically, often we have to react now. And
there may be some of that. Are there any other things, people that become victims of crimes, those are the people I think that the criminal justice system should really focus on, is protecting and preventing future victims. Are there any things that lawmakers can do to prevent the actual occurrence? Because a lot of the time we're talking about solving the crime after it happened. What can we do to prevent the crime from happening?
I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think in general we can produce environments for young people that support them such that they don't turn to crime. A tremendous amount of crime occurs with young people that have no business being anywhere but in a safe home and in school. I think improving that and improving the responsiveness of our social service agencies are important. I think alternatives to normal incarceration are important. I'm a great fan of military approach to incarceration. Like
what does that mean?
Where we have a program where people that have left high school and really have nowhere to go actually can become part of what used to be called a military school.
Like a ROTC program, or they're going into a separate military academy?
They're going to get a degree eventually. They're going to get that kind of structure and training. There are other things that are going on as well.
So conscription, not crime.
I wouldn't call it conscription.
Not quite, just
it's
a nudge.
Voluntary.
Voluntary.
Yeah, it's structure. There are a lot of things. There are probably 100 things that have been contemplated.
I notice a pin on your lapel there. I notice a pin on your lapel there. What is that?
Oh, this is the pin that gets me into the House floor.
Oh, it is?
It's just the reason you don't recognize it is almost no one wears it.
I didn't know from here if it had a military insignia on it.
I have one of those too.
Do you?
Yeah.
You served in?
I served in Vietnam.
Thank you for your service and welcome
thank you
home.
for saying that.
Which branch?
I was in the Army.
Do you think that kind of selfless sacrifice, that kind of service, what does that add to the perspective of an elected official?
Oh, I think it's really important. I think it, at least speaking for me and others I've noticed, there is an ethic that comes with your experience that says, I owe it to society to do something beyond myself. I owe it to sacrifice. I owe it to society to work for the betterment of others despite what it does for me. I think that comes with military service. That's been my experience.
Well, it's been a very interesting conversation. I wish we could keep going longer. Representative Mark Walker, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
All right, we'll be back in just one moment.